Hi there, folks. My name is Josh Buck, and I'm the Executive Director Curator of the Clark Historical. Welcome to the first symposium as part of our new exhibition, Chinese Pioneers, Power and Politics in Exclusion-Era Photographs. Today's symposium is Chinese Labor Days, Contributions of Local Chinese Pioneers to 19th-Century Humboldt County. I'd like to make a land acknowledgement that the Clark Museum sits on unceded Wiyot land in Eureka. Despite action taken by local, state, and the federal government, the Wiyot people are still here, and they are still among us in our community today. I do ask all of you to please silence your cell phones if you have not already. We thank the California Historical Society for loaning their traveling exhibition. We also thank our respective partners, including the Clark Historical Museum staff and volunteers, Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity, also known as HOPI, the Humboldt County Historical Society, and the Humboldt County Library for making this exhibition possible at the local level. This exhibit and the associated events are also made possible with support from California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. During the run of Chinese Pioneers, artifacts connected with Chinese communities in Humboldt and Trinity counties will be on display here at the Clark from tonight through December 29th. The exhibit features items from the collections of the Clark Museum, the Humboldt County Historical Society, and the Trinity County Historical Society. I now invite all of those who had a hand in making this exhibit possible. Please raise your hand to indicate to the folks in this room that you helped us out. Raise it way up high. Yeah. Many more folks helped make tonight possible. It takes a lot to get an exhibit like this done, and it wouldn't have been possible without all their individual help. And for those of you that are watching this from home that helped, you have my sincere thanks, as well as the folks who are here with us tonight. You are all marvelous. Thank you very much for your support. Please enjoy the new exhibitions after the panel has concluded. We do invite you to register for our forthcoming second symposium on Friday, October 4th, that will be here at the Clark Museum. This symposium will feature 19th century Chinese pioneers of Humboldt's neighboring counties, with panelists Darrow Forsland and Jack Frost, who will present on Trinity County, Lorraine He Chorley, who will present on Mendocino County, Dr. Cheen Faisler, who will present on Del Norte and neighboring counties, and Jessica Chu, who will focus on Red Bluff and Tehama County. But wait, there's more. At the Humboldt County Library on Wednesday, September 25th at 5, there will be a film screening titled Two Pioneering Chinese American Stars from the Golden Age of Hollywood. Two classic detective films, Phantom of Chinatown, which debuted in 1940, starring Ki Luke, and Daughter of Shanghai, which premiered in 1937, starring Anna May Wong, will be screened at the Humboldt County Library at 5. Following the screenings, there will be a discussion on how vintage films like these reflect and shape perceptions of Chinese Americans in the 1930s and 40s. Both events are free to attend, just like this one, but seating is limited. So be sure to register for these events soon. I now invite Jasmine Brown, our Neelis Hall Registrar Curator, to share some information about the exhibits that she has masterfully curated here in this wing of the museum, Neelis Hall.
Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Josh said, my name is Jasmine Brown, and I'm the Curator Registrar for Neelis Hall, which is where we're at right now. Tonight we're opening two new exhibits in Neelis Hall, the first being Traditional Trade and Exchange, which explores a wide variety of resources and goods that were traded throughout the region, as well as the various uses of those materials. That display is behind the screen right now, but after the panel you'll be able to see it. And then in the case along the wall over here is our Brian Tripp exhibit, which highlights the life and artistic work of Brian Tripp. Brian was a Karuk artist, activist, and poet who created an immense body of work over his lifetime. The Clark Historical Museum is honored to be the home for his mural, The Sunset Twice on the People That Day, which is installed on the outside of Neelis Hall. I would like to thank the Trinidad Museum, Jason Lawrence, Gina Lawrence, and Larry Swingseth for loaning us some of their Brian Tripp collections, as well as Monica at Art Center Frame Shop for framing some of those pieces for us for the show. I am now going to recite a poem written by Brian that he would say at the opening of events. It's also in the display case for the exhibit. Please say a prayer for the home ground, the rivers, the rocks, the mountains, the ocean, the trees. Please say a prayer for the people, the animals, the fish, the birds, and the bees. They're going to need them. Yotwa, Yotwa, Yotwa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'd now like to invite up Dr. Sue Lee, former professor of biology at Humboldt State University, member of HOPI, and project coordinator for this exhibition, to share some words about seeing this exhibit come to light.
Thanks, Josh, for inviting me to share some thoughts. First, I want to welcome all of our guests here today and our panelists to today's not only symposium, but also for the California Pioneers exhibit. Can you hear me okay? Okay. That's my husband Archie who's telling me that. Anyway, this entire project could not have happened without the outstanding committee that I've had the privilege to work with and the pleasure to work with. And through their dedication, their dedicated commitment, their hard labors of love, and their wonderful ideas, their creative ideas, that all came together so that they so that we could have, for example, the content of the displays over here next. I'm sorry, the content of the displays over there next door. You know, there was a lot of thought put into the development of the film screening that's going to happen on September the 25th. There was a lot of thought put into the ideas and the panelists for the symposium. And also a lot of thought put into the grant writing for the funding for this project. And finally, of course, Josh, you should have put your hand up before. You know, all the details that are involved in the installation of the Chinese Pioneers exhibit and more. I mean, you know, it's just innumerous. Anyway, for all of this, I am deeply, deeply grateful, and I want to, you know, express my appreciation. These people have just done outstanding work, and I want to acknowledge them in person. So there's Dr. Alex Service. She currently is the curator of the Fortuna Depot Museum and has been you have been the president of the Historical Society, haven't you? Humboldt County Historical Society. Also, Amy Uecki over there. Yeah, she's a member of HOPI and chair of the Eureka Chinatown Monument. And there is Josh over here. You know who he is, right? He's already introduced himself, curator here and director of the museum, Clark Historical Museum. And then Pat Bitton, and where is she? I thought I saw her. Yeah, there she is. And she's the vice president, isn't she, of the Clark Museum Board? And Susan Doniger, where are you? Where are you, Susan?
To your left there.
Oh, there she is. And she's a member of the Humboldt Historical Society. So these people come with a lot of credentials, you know, and I'm kind of like, here, not a historian at all. But so I really am privileged to be working with these people. I'm learning a lot. And I also want to extend my gratitude and appreciation to Lele. Where is she? But I think she might be out there. Yeah, okay. Leilania Dubois. She's the marketing and events coordinator for the Clark Museum. So I would like to just say, let's give them a big hand, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. You know, these people have been working for, I'm sorry. These people have been working for the last, past year, let's see now, for a year and 8 months, actually, to be accurate. And they've been, you know, coordinating, planning, and making decisions. And we've been meeting monthly this year. And we've also, you know, we've been talking to each other. They've been talking to each other by phone, email, getting out into the community and talking to people about participating in this project. So thank you all for that. So for me personally, being part of this project and being part of the larger initiative of the Eureka Monument Committee has really been a heartwarming and exciting and enlightening experience for me, and I just feel very grateful to be a part of all of this. And I just wanted to remind you something. I think you've all heard this. Something that Ken Burns said, you know, and you've heard him say this, and he said once upon a time. If I can get my sheet over here. He said, the power of compelling stories, memories, and anecdotes help us to understand the present in which we exist. And so for me, there are themes in this Chinese Pioneers exhibit that resonate with some current and recent issues that we're dealing with right now. You know, issues like immigration, citizenship, the border issues. So it's really important, I think, that we learn about what's happened in the past so that we understand how easily these things can happen still. And we're doing this so that we don't repeat the errors of the past, and that we also don't demonize and marginalize people who are different. For me, you know, recovering the story of the Chinese here in California and in Humboldt County is also helping me to learn more about the people who settled in this area who look like me, you know, that they did contribute something to the infrastructure of this place where I live. And this is not meant, you know, not meant just for me, not meant just for anybody of Asian origin, but I think it's also meant for all of us who live here, because this is our home. This is a place we call home. This is the story of our place, our home, and is part of our shared common history. Yeah. And the story of the Chinese, I think, is an important part of our shared common history. And it is what makes this place unique. It is what makes our home have its unique identity as Humboldt and also here as California. And so we welcome you to the Chinese Pioneers exhibit, to the symposium today, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much, Sue. Let's give Sue one last big round of applause for everything that she's done. Our hero during this process. Thank you, Sue. The format of this panel is very straightforward. I will ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, followed by 2 questions tailored to their expertise. Please save your individual questions for the end of the discussion. Following the panel discussion, please enjoy the catering provided, which can be found in the front of the Clark. Please don't feel rushed when it comes to looking at any of the exhibits here tonight. They will be up and open to the public starting at 6 p.m. tonight. You will be the first to see them, and they will be on display through December on display through December 28th, I believe. And will be open until 9 p.m. this evening. Without further ado, let's meet our panel. First up is Katie Bush. Katie Bush is a public history master's student at Sacramento State and former executive director and curator of the Clark Historical Museum. Next up is Daryl Chin, resident of Humboldt County since 1975 and poetry teacher since 1983. Next is Dr. Alex Service. Alex is a member of the Eureka Chinatown Project, a Humboldt County Historical Society board member, and has been curator of the Fortuna Depot Museum since 2009. She has her BA in East Asian Studies from UCLA and her master's and PhD in Medieval Studies from the University of York in England. And we've also got Yolanda Latham, who possesses an MBA and works with the Moon Creek Corporation Administrative, and she works with the Moon Creek Corporation Administrative as a volunteer, and she is with the Eureka Chinatown Project as a contributor and ally. Let's give them all a big round of applause for being here with us. With that said, Katie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So hi everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Let's see. I mean, that was a pretty good introduction. I guess how I got started with this whole Eureka Chinatown event is when I was working here in 2019, there's a clay pot that's actually on display out there. It's in a glass case next to two other clay pots. That was brought into the museum by a donor who said it had been in their family for a really long time, and they thought it belonged at the museum. And I was like, oh, it's a cool old clay pot, but what's the story? And he said, well, you know, my relative way back when got it out of Chinatown after the expulsion. And I was like, the expulsion? Well, A, there was an expulsion, and B, there's a Chinatown? What? Tell me more, you know? And so from there, you know, started doing more research into the expulsion and what had happened in the 1880s, and eventually put together an exhibit right at the beginning of 2020. So yeah, and from there, you know, lots of people came together and started making, you know, this whole Eureka Chinatown project. So, you know, it's been a large team effort, and it's been so great to see everything take off as it has. But yeah, so today, am I keeping on screen? Okay. So today, what I'll be sharing is a couple of things about the timeline for the types of jobs that Chinese immigrants held in Humboldt County, and then we'll kind of look at where those workplaces are located, and kind of take a closer look at some of those specific sites. So on the screen here, which might be a little washed out, is there a way we can like dim the lights maybe? So let's see. So this is called a story map. It's a very cool tool to help tell this story visually. You might notice in some sections there's not a whole lot of pictures. It's something we're still working on, but also there's not a lot of images of Chinatown. So anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll come back to this particular picture. But this is, if you were to stand on 101 going south looking up the street, this is what you would see off to the left side back in the 1880s, including Tung Sing washing and ironing. You can see a scaffolding up in the upper, let's see, left corner. That is the scaffolding that would be used to dry laundry. And we'll talk a little bit more about that down the way. So, whoops, I gotta scroll back up. We'll sneak peek real quick. Okay, here we go. So let's see. So when we look at Chinese immigration to California, like many other immigrants that came to California, the gold rush was a big deal, to say the least. So Some of the earliest gold rush miners, the Chinese immigrants, came out to the Trinity and the Klamath rivers, and they would also frequently work digging sites that were abandoned previously by white miners who said that there wasn't enough gold coming out of the ground. But the Chinese miners would come in, they'd continue working the sites, and although it was less, the continuous work on the sites would yield a good amount over time. But then we have the foreign miners tax, which came into impact, supposedly all just foreign miners in general, but it more specifically impacted Chinese miners. And that tax was for non-U.S. citizens. So Chinese immigrants at the time were not allowed to become citizens. And so they were charged $20 a month, which doesn't sound like a lot nowadays, but that would be a couple $100s now in modern day dollars, adjusting for inflation. So it caused a lot of miners to start leaving the gold fields and going to towns like Eureka. And eventually that tax was repealed, but then other different versions kind of popped up over time. But that was a continuing force that pressured a lot of miners to leave the gold fields. There's also increasing violence against the Chinese miners as well, although there have been some instances where the law would side with Chinese miners. So it did happen. But anyway, so Chinese miners started coming into the cities, and they started picking up all kinds of different work, which we can take a look at. This is a particularly interesting quote. So this is still kind of in the 1850s, but Governor John McDougall was speaking to the state legislature, and he called the Chinese immigrants, quote, one of the most worthy classes of our newly adopted citizens. And that had to do with the work that Chinese farmers had been doing kind of in areas like the Central Valley, of reclaiming swamplands and turning it into really prolific farming. But then if you look at later years, later governors of California would completely change their tune about how they felt about Chinese immigrants. But at this point in time, they were thinking it would be great to have more Chinese immigrants coming to California to convert more land from swampland into farmland. So we will go ahead here and skip ahead down here. So this is a map that I've put together. Let's see if I can zoom it out a little bit. So we're looking at Chinese workplaces kind of in Eureka and directly adjacent areas. And this is not a complete picture of that. As we continue doing research, we'll be able to add more to this map. But let's take a look at some of these workplaces. So some of these have approximate locations because we're not exactly sure where they were at, but some of them we do have more precise locations. So Singcheng Laundry, so this is F Street between 4th and 5th, so this is kind of an estimate here. One thing that was interesting when I was looking into Chinese laundry work, so that's kind of one of the main things when you might talk to someone about like, oh, you know, Chinese immigrants came to California, what kind of work did they do? The really famous one is, oh, of course, the Chinese laundry. And one of the questions I had about it was, you know, why laundry? That, you know, there's a lot of jobs people could do, why laundry? So, of course, laundry at the time was a very time-intensive and, you know, difficult job, not something you really wanted to do all the time. But additionally, one of the things that caused Chinese laundries to really take off in terms of numbers is certain, like if you were wealthy enough to have someone else do your laundry early in the day, there was actually a export business in laundry. So what people would do is they would package up their laundry, they'd drop it off, and it would get shipped to Hawaii or China. And they would do the laundry overseas and they'd ship it back, which sounds insane. I had to look it up. but it did happen. And then there was a period of time where the story goes, there was a Chinese man in San Francisco that said, I could probably open a laundry here maybe and make some money, you know? And so back in the day, it would cost you $12 per pound bundle of clothing to get washed. Being able to do it domestically dropped that price significantly. So people who could formerly not afford to have their laundry done by someone else all of a sudden could. So you start seeing these Chinese laundries pop up in urban areas, San Francisco, and also Eureka. So that's a really interesting story. Let's see, there was also, so this map shows many of those different laundries. Most of them are just kind of from newspaper articles that Alex has been finding in her extensive research. And then some of them have been ones that have popped up in other research papers that people have done over the years. Let's see, so we looked at Tung Sing, and then, so sometimes when you're looking at Chinese laundries, they'll show up in close proximity to hotels, particularly along the waterfront. This is an example, so this 3rd and D Street one was right next to the Bay Hotel. So it was, let's see, 3rd, so it was probably just a little behind us here on the block there. Let me see here. Yeah, and one of these days I'm gonna figure out how to color code these dots so we can kind of see the different ones. But you can kind of see there's a lot of laundries right here along the waterfront. Oh, this is the one I'm looking for. Here we go. So City Laundry. This is a close-up picture of a Sanborn map, which is, historians love these Sanborn maps, they're amazing. But so we can see that there's a Chinese laundry here, but then there's also this City Laundry, which when I saw this, I was really wondering, you know, this is interesting, this one's not labeled as a Chinese laundry. And from what we've been able to figure out, Alex has done a lot of this, is that the laundry marketed itself as a non-Chinese operated laundry, one of the only, if not the only one, on Humboldt Bay. So people who didn't want to support Chinese laundries might send their laundry to this particular one operated by Frank Weaver. And he would pick up laundry from places in Arcata. He'd drop it off at the post office. He'd cart it into Eureka, do the laundry, and then take it back. So anyway, we will scoot right along here. There's additional laundries all along the waterfront there. And let's see, so Kang Hop, this was one of the companies that after the expulsion happened, there was a court case called Wing Hing versus the city of Eureka. Kang Hop was one of the litigants in that case. And from what we've been able to tell based on the court documents and whatnot, this was a pretty wealthy business in Eureka. They did a lot of business, likely with miners and other workers in the hills. But he also had a couple of employees, Tom Wah and Tom Sing Tao, who were kind of younger men. And then here's kind of their census records here. So they kept a store, and they're probably one of the businesses that we have kind of the most information on, which is pretty cool. So we see some descriptions of kind of the Chinatown area, the 4th Street area, merchandise stores, rooming houses, opium dens, and market shops. Let's see. And then we'll see a couple of these where it talks about employment offices, China grocery store and employment offices, how workers would frequently get jobs as they would come to the area, and then there would be these labor contractors that would set up teams of workers that would be hired by people building roads, people building railroads. If you needed a lot of people to get a job done, you'd go find a labor contractor. They would arrange for those workers to be fed and be housed kind of wherever the work site was. And then the employer would pay the labor contractor. The labor contractor would also hire a cook to cook for these workers, and then they'd pay the wages out that way, which is interesting. And we doing okay on time? Okay. Let's see. So there's also we have people working in places like the Vance Hotel. We also have people working on shingle mills out in Fairhaven. And then we even have people working in the county hospital and almshouse, way out here, kind of, oops, I think this is by one of the schools now, by Eureka High, I believe. But anyway, so this is kind of just a quick intro to this. We're going to try to get this on the Hoppy website, perhaps. So if you want to take a closer look at it, there's a lot of information. It'll be up there shortly, but and I'm happy to show more in the questions period if we got time. So, okay.
Thank you very much, Katie. And it's an amazing resource that you've put together for everybody. It is, and that will be up later on the website. And please spend a lot of time taking a look at it. There's many, many things to learn. This next question, of course, is for Daryl. Daryl, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Salt Lake City, and my first language was evidently Chinese. We moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in about 1950, and my father said one day, a neighbor said to him, "Isn't it nice that our sons get along?" And my dad said, "Well, my son doesn't speak English." And the friend said, "Yes, he does." So my father discovered that I could speak English. So I have an interesting history with speaking Chinese, because when my younger of two sisters was born in '54, my parents said, "You may only speak Chinese to her." And about the same time, my mother started driving us to Chinese school in Oakland, which is about 20 miles away. And she did this for 6 years straight, after school, public school, 5 days a week, 6 years straight. So you can imagine the dedication. And also, it was 2 hours, so I've always wondered what my mother did during those 2 hours. Okay. And then when we graduated from Chinese school, she said, "It's my turn to go to school." And she went back to college, which her mother and her parents had denied her, because they said she had to support the family of 11 siblings during the beginning of the Second World War. So when our daughter was born in 1983, I realized that my wife does not speak Chinese, and so there was only one way that she was going to learn, because she was born in Baltimore. So that's what I did, was I spoke Chinese from the day she was born. Some kids, when I tell them this, they say, "How do you do that?" And you do it with great difficulty. After a while, it gets easier. But for anybody who's bilingual here or trilingual, you basically say, if your daughter walks in the room, you say, "You need to do morokoya." You just turn around and speak Chinese to them, and then you turn around and say, "Okay, kids, we're going to do this." It's as straightforward as that. And Phyllis, my wife, has learned to translate UN style from listening to me talk Chinese to her. So even though she says she's tone deaf, she's been able to do that. I started teaching poetry in the schools around 1986, 87, and I taught in 7 different states in English. Occasionally I've written a poem in Spanish, and I'll read you a poem today in English, but I've worked on putting it into Chinglish. So it won't have the word "okay" in it, but it will have the old Chinese dialect that I think that people in Chinatown, Eureka, spoke in 1885.
Thank you, Daryl. Can you explain the discovery process for establishing context for our local Chinese pioneer history, can you share one of the most exciting pieces that has come forward on the subject recently?
Well, I was at the Historical Society yesterday looking through the folders. There are 4 folders. Everybody seems to know about Charlie Moon, but his relatives, when Chisa Hughes was working on a video called Many Moons, when Chisa Hughes interviewed people, a number of people looked at the picture of Charlie Moon and said, no, that's not Charlie. Okay, so that raises another question, and that is, well, who is that, and who was Charlie? What we've discovered what we've all discovered is that there seems to be more and more that's new about what we find out. There was just simply, after 1885, it appears that the history of the Chinese in Humboldt County disappeared or stopped. But that's true and it's not true. Okay, because there were Chinese that were left, there were Chinese that were kept, there were Chinese that were kept and then they left because they felt uncomfortable. I'm not related to Ben Chin, okay? I'm not related to Betty Chin, okay? And really, but that actually has some relevance because when I was in high school, I found a Chinese girl that I could go out to like senior activities with, but she was a Chan. In Chinese, it's the same Chinese word. And in rural China, you didn't do that, okay? It was forbidden because it would be like marrying your father's brother's daughter, okay? It would be considered incest, okay? So for some of you that know anthropological terms, that's called parallel cousin. Anyway, so that's one of the things that I discovered is what we don't know. I continually discovered more. The Committee of 15, which had to do with making the expulsion of the 1885 Chinese orderly, one of them actually went on a boat with those expelled Chinese down to San Francisco. Why? To make sure they got off the boat? I don't know. I just found that out yesterday. Okay, so that's to answer Josh's question. That's what I'm finding out is I keep finding out stuff. Okay, so if you start looking, you're going to keep finding.
Can you expand on? You mentioned the Committee of 15. For those of those here that don't know what that is, could you tell us a little bit about that?
City Councilman Kendall was walking by in the late afternoon of February 7th, 1885, and there was a Tong war. It's like a gang fight, okay? That's what a Tong is. It's a gang, okay? And there were shots, and Kendall was killed. Immediately the community was up in arms, literally and figuratively, and they wanted to. They gathered in Centennial Hall, up the street here. They gathered in Centennial Hall and they said, "We want to kill and burn." As who was it, Arlo Guthrie said, "I want to kill. I want to kill." Okay, and so somebody said, "Wait a second, we can't do this," and so they formed a committee of 15. And they were leaders of the community, and they were charged with making an orderly expulsion of the Chinese. So that's what the Committee of 15 was. In Crescent City, there was something called the Committee of 21, some of whom came from Eureka.
Thank you, Daryl. Third question. What has it been like to see this movement to preserve and share this history come to light? What would you say is so crucial about sharing the history of Eureka's Chinatown?
There's so much to learn. You learn about the history of the Chinese in California and the West. At one point, there was as many as 25 to 50% of the workforce on the West Coast was Chinese men. Okay. We already know that a Chinese man invented the Bing cherry or the Valencia orange. Okay. When I didn't learn this in high school. I learned that the Chinese built the dikes, they built the vineyards, they built the wineries, they built the road between Bryceland and Shelter Cove, they built the road out to Petrolia. You know, you just keep learning and learning, and then supposedly it stops after 1885, but it doesn't stop. It keeps going, right? So much that I want to say, I thought about this yesterday, and I thought, we got to get off Charlie Moon. There's more than Charlie Moon, okay?
Thank you very much. Next is Dr. Alex Service. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, definitely. And I want to thank everybody for bearing with me for still wearing the mask. I just got over a bout of COVID, so decided for everybody's comfort level, I'll keep the mask on. Could we get the lights turned up again for almost blind people reading their notes and so forth? So a little bit about myself and how I got involved with all of this. It was really through Sue Lee and the Chinese Pioneers exhibit that I became involved with the Eureka Chinatown project. In January of 2023, Sue called me up as a member of the Historical Society board and asked if the Humboldt County Historical Society would be interested in partnering with the Clark and the ECP in bringing this exhibit, Chinese Pioneers, to Humboldt County. And we said we were definitely interested, and we started talking about the possibilities. And in that process, I was talking with Sue about the work of the Eureka Chinatown project, and was talking about how excited I was to see that it had come into being, and asked if perhaps there was a way I could be involved with that as well. And so I was graciously permitted to join the Eureka Chinatown Monument Planning Committee, and have just really loved and treasured being involved with this wonderful group of people and working on making this part of Humboldt County's history visible and sort of reintegrated back into the story of Humboldt County. So yeah, I guess I'll turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you, Alex. First question. Are there specific individuals from the period who offer insight into Chinese residents' labor and business contributions? And is there evidence to be gained from examining business advertisements from the time?
Definitely. And when Katie was sharing her story map and scrolling through the locations of various businesses, one of them that you saw there was Charlie Mock's China grocery store. And if you go out when you're looking at the exhibits and look at the community case near the front of the building, ECP or Hoppy as well, has done this case on the upcoming Chinatown monument that's in the planning process now. And as part of that exhibit, they have reproductions of some of the ads that appeared in the Humboldt County newspapers during the 1880s for Chinese businesses. And one of them is this ad for Charlie Mock's China Grocery Store and Employment Office, which is up there, E Street between 4th and 5th. It says, we'll furnish cooks, railroad laborers, and laborers of all kinds. Also mentions that the store sells all kinds of rice, sugar, coffee, and other groceries. One of the really interesting things to me about the fact that there are so many of these ads for Chinese businesses in the Humboldt Times and Humboldt Times Telephone in the 1880s, there's probably 15 or so different businesses advertised. These are advertisements in English. These are advertisements in an English language newspaper. So it's showing that these are businesses that do not just cater to the Chinese community. They're businesses that can reasonably expect that English-speaking, English-reading readers of the Humboldt Times will be their potential customers. So that is a striking thing right there. Now, one of the things that's mentioned in Charlie Mock's ad is that he will furnish railroad laborers, and there's another notice that appeared in the Humboldt Times on January 20th of 1883, which says, "Notice to railroad men, any parties in want of Chinese laborers to work on railroads or other work can be accommodated by calling on the undersigned. I have been engaged in working Chinamen for Fernald and Yoakum on the Arcata Railroad, and for the Messrs. Hooper at Trinidad. I refer to these gentlemen for my responsibility. Inquire at the house of Sing Lee, Eureka, G. Todd. So again, we're seeing that there are Chinese people working in the construction of multiple different railroads in Humboldt County, and we can get glimpses of this from these ads. And the house of Sing Lee in Eureka, there are also ads for Sing Lee's laundry, I believe, in Eureka, Chinatown. So that's where people were supposed to go to find this particular Chinese contractor and get him to hire men for them for working on their railroads. And then recently, over the last couple of months, Josh and I have been trying to determine a bit more about the different railroads of Humboldt County, which were largely built by Chinese labor in the 1880s. And it turns out there really are quite a number of them. We found a reference, January 23rd, 1884, the Humboldt Times Telephone mentions that several hundred Chinese are working on the construction of the Elk River Railroad, so the railroad that serviced Falk. May 2nd, 1885, the Times Telephone had an article about the slackness of industry at the time and compared how badly the economy was doing then to what it had been doing a year before. And they said a year ago this month, so that would be in May of 1884, the California Redwood Company employed over 300 white workers and nearly 100 Chinamen employed in the freshwater section alone. And this article said that about 100 Chinamen were employed in ballasting old roads and building new ones and making extensions and sidings. We also know that Chinese workers were involved in building the Pacific Lumber Company's railroad, and the piece of specific information we've gotten about that is a tragic piece of information. It was a September 6, 1884 Times Telephone article on the death of a worker who was building the Pacific Lumber Company's railroad. And that article said, Thursday afternoon on the line of road being built on the river by the Pacific Lumber Company, a Chinaman was killed by an explosion, or rather by one of the blasts. His name was Lim Feng, and he was 24 years old. And that ties in with something that I've been finding recently, is that it looks like the Lim family, or the Lim clan, was one that was very present in Eureka, because a number of the names in the Wang Hing versus the City of Eureka lawsuit are Lim names. You find other mentions in newspaper articles and in court records and various other documents. So that's something that hopefully we'll be following up in the future, and maybe being able to track down more information through possibly connections with the Lim Family Association and so forth.
Thank you.
Do you want to mention, after the explosion, what the publicity about Chinese labor was? I want to mention that after 1885, the Humboldt County business community bragged in printed literature that it really wanted people and businesses to relocate to Humboldt County, and that one of the good things about Humboldt County was there was no Chinese labor.
Thank you for that, Daryl. And we actually have one of those advertisements on display tonight. It is from the Panama Pacific Convention of 1915, well after the 1885 expulsion. And that is one of the big things that Humboldt County paid to have advertised. So thank you for bringing that up. Alex, second question, is there anything particularly noteworthy in the courthouse ledgers that are currently displayed in the main hall that provide background information on the Chinese residents of Humboldt?
So yes, in the exhibit at the moment, we have, I think, 5 different ledgers from the Humboldt County Historical Society collection, things from the storeroom in the society. And a few months ago, I just went through 100 probably of these ledgers looking for any mention of Chinese people. And a lot more, really, than I had expected was coming up, and all sorts of very intriguing glimpses that you can find. So definitely hope everybody will have a chance to look at those in the exhibit. Of course, we can't have them open to every single page that has an interesting record, but there are definitely some glimpses that are pretty striking. One thing that we don't actually have, I believe, the ledgers open to out there, but it's the glimpse of a story that is intriguing to me and that hopefully we'll be able to track more down about, is that in April of 1884, 3 different men who apparently were Chinese labor contractors were brought into court for refusing to give the names of the men who worked for them to the road overseer for the collection of road tax. Apparently, there had been an ordinance that had just been passed in, I think, February of 1884, and it was coming into effect in sometime in March of 1884 that, let's see, I found a newspaper article about it. It was basically that every man living in Humboldt County between the ages of 21 and 55 was supposed to give a certain number of hours of work on road construction in Humboldt County, or if he didn't do that, he was supposed to pay $3 as road tax. And so this came into effect in March, and it's in April of the same year that these 3 different labor contractors are being brought to trial for refusing to give the names of their workers to the road tax overseers. And I haven't actually found anything in the California newspapers at the time talking about resistance to road tax or about organized Chinese resistance to road tax. But it seems that there is something like that going on, since we have these 3 different contractors doing this. And one thing that I had suspected is that a lot of workers, it seems, would travel from place to place in California as jobs came up. And so you might have these people living in several different counties throughout the year. Each county had its own road tax, so probably there's a lot of resistance to the idea of, look, I just paid road tax in Sonoma County, damned if I'm going to be paying it in Humboldt County as well. And so this could be part of what's causing this resistance. So in these records, we've actually got the information about these trials, and Charlie Mock is one of the people, same Charlie Mock who we saw his ad. He's here as Charlie Muck, I think, in this particular record, but on April 7th of 1884, he was in court for, again, refusing to give the names of the men under his employ. And he was found guilty, and he was committed to county jail for sentence, and then the sentence was said that he either was going to have to spend 10 days in jail, or he was going to have to pay a fine of $111. And he paid the fine and was discharged. So these are some of the glimpses, some of the fascinating glimpses that we're getting of some of these people. Not only Charlie Mock, but also Sing Yek, who's somebody whose name that you'll see coming up a lot in the exhibits. It was actually outside his store that the fatal shot was fired that led to the death of Councilman Kendall. Sing Yek was also one of the around 17 Chinese men who were arrested on the night of Councilman Kendall's death, arrested as suspects because the shooting took place right outside his store. And he appears in a lot of different county records, including these ones about refusing to give the names for road tax. He was another contractor who was brought up on these same charges. Oddly enough, though, the case against him was eventually dismissed because, and it doesn't give the details, but it says in the court records that he was found to be the wrong person. So I don't know if they actually brought somebody else into court who was not Sing Yek, and so he got released because it was the wrong guy, or whether it turned out, no, it wasn't Sing Yek the contractor, it was somebody else the contractor. So that's just left as one of the mysteries that we have in trying to piece together these people's stories. So yes, those are the things I wanted to share.
Thank you, Alex. Yolanda, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes. Hello? Can you guys hear me? Hi, I'm Yolanda Latham. I'm Bessie Moon's great-granddaughter. Bessie Moon was my great-grandmother, and she was the daughter of the Charlie Moon that was here in Humboldt County. He was an employee of Thomas Bear. He was considered one of the last Chinese people to stay in Humboldt County or be allowed to because he lived so far up into the Redwood Valley area, Redwood Creek area. Tom Bear was goes synonymous with Charlie Moon because of the stories and the political connections that he had to Humboldt County at the time, being one of the largest pack train mule people in the area to bring supplies in and out of Indian country all the way out to the coast in Arcata. The current property that I help volunteer overseeing for conservation and cultural burning and restoration is the original land that Minnie Tom was from. Minnie Tom was the daughter of Mary Tom and Dr. Tom out of the Redwood Creek area. They were considered some of the last Cholula. There's northern Cholula, central Cholula, Wilcutt, and then southern Wilcutt. That region there is considered the Redwood Creek watershed. Our allotments are still up there. We still go there. We gather. We have graves there. We have sacred spaces there. Charlie Moon was the legend in Humboldt County. Did I choose that? No, I did not, Daryl. I know most people in this area know Charlie Moon as the famous Chinese person that had been able to remain, but I can tell you that his story is one that goes hand in hand with genocide. It goes hand in hand with erasure, violence. It goes along with labor, almost like slavery in a way. We like to romanticize history and make it seem like it was this wonderful, thing that had happened. But for my people that come out of Redwood Creek and the Hoopa and Karuk and those people in their areas, colonization wasn't good for us at all. Immigration has never been something we've associated with something good for our families, for the land, for the water, for anything in the area. We are very aware of that. We fight in different ways. I think it's easy to fight with violence. It's easy to fight with discrimination, oppression, microaggressions. It's easy to fight with those things, but what the hard thing is to do is to move together forward and try to make it a peaceful existence. I became keenly aware of who Charlie Moon was my whole life growing up, because I did get raised partially in Fortuna, Eureka, and then eventually moved to the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation where I currently live on the land that my great-great-great-grandfather lived on from when they originally created the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation, and I live right near the river. The area historically has many, many stories. One of the stories I always hoped the museum would focus on are the Bald Hill Wars. The Bald Hill Wars are where my people come from. We fought and we fought to keep the pack trains out. And it must be wonderful to know that my great-great-grandfather helped the pack trains go through. You know what I mean? So the pack trains, from what I understand, were 50 at a time. Those mules could carry up to 350 pounds. And at times, those roads were narrow, they were small, and they used to go in and deliver to grocery stores, to the miners, everybody who was colonizing the land. So during that time, the Bald Hill Wars, my understanding is that the war started because of the food. When they brought the trains through, when they brought people through to go mine down Orleans way, they killed everything in the way. They needed gloves, so they killed all the elk. Elk made good gloves. They didn't take all the meat with them. They left them. They brought pigs to, take along, raise them up, and then be able to feed everybody and miners and sell them. But those pigs eat the trunks of oak trees. That's where our acorns are. They eat everything. Pork or, pigs, they are an interesting animal that will eat anything and everything. And my people from Redwood Creek would eat, natural potatoes from the ground. We go harvest depending on the time of the year. And so gold rush wasn't good for any of us. And frankly, there's probably a scientific study out there to try to figure out how we are still here today. And I think it's because we have instincts. We have survival instincts. We don't always tell the truth. We don't always tell you where we are. We don't always give you all our secrets. So sometimes it seems confusing. So that's the mystery. That's the magic. We say there's stories for us, and then there's stories for other people. And that's how we preserve ourselves. It's how we save ourselves. And we stick to it. And there's always discussions in our home that are like, are you going to tell them the real story? It's like, well, we'll tell them a story. And everybody loves a good native story, once upon a time. But I can tell you today, we're doing okay. We could be doing better. The world is in a tough place. There's so much work to do as humans and come together in unity, which some days I think that's just a dream. There's so much going on in the world between the economics of the world, water war, you know, our fish and crab are dying. And I can see the tensions building in our area here in Humboldt County because of the economics. Our economics here are struggling. And I think we all want jobs. We all want something to work, but it's at what cost? The opportunity cost is always, you know, it's always something. Somebody has to give up something. And those are discussions for the, I always say, the big power people. But there has to be a way forward. There has to be. And there's things that are going to happen in the climate, in the world, that we won't be able to explain. That's just how it is. I do believe in science, by the way. But I've learned over time that when I speak about my Moon family, I speak of it with love. My Grandpa Charlie with love and respect. Minnie Tom with respect. And anybody I work with. And the reason I am part of the Eureka Chinatown project is because I was reading an article. I think it was the New York Times and San Francisco Chronicle, and they were talking about how elders in San Francisco were being attacked. And it was during COVID because of the COVID-19, and they were saying, no, they're bringing that disease here, they're bringing that virus here, which is things I've heard before, you know. And I was like, but what did they do? So I go in a deep dive and start reading this article, and they, you know, just somebody walking down the street, they get bludgeoned to death. That is not okay. But what's more surprising is those things happen on Indian reservations all the time for no real reason. So I thought that can't be right, you know. So when this came up, I don't know what I was doing. I was reading the minutes of the, I think it was the city of Eureka, and they said, oh, Eureka Chinatown project. I thought, you know, this is a time to say, hey, you know what? We got to band together. We have to make things work in a way that's peaceful and a way forward, and to bring up Grandpa Charlie. Everybody loves Grandpa Charlie. I don't like to romanticize anything very much, but I know that we have to live in the same area. Our kids all go to school. We play against each other in high school and all the different sports, and we do all agree on environmental stuff most of the time. But history's a tough one, especially being American Indian. And the history that I know about my people, it's sad, it's disappointing. It's there's when I think about it, I wonder, what are we going to do to change going forward? What can we do? Because I'm looking in this room and I always think, where are our youth? Where are our youth? Those are the ones we got to get their minds in and say, don't let this happen again. Don't, you know, how do we create this into curriculum and say, this should never happen, ever, you know? So that's what I think about. So that's who I am. I'm Yolanda Latham. My grandmother's Bessie Moon, the daughter of Charlie Moon. And I live on the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation near the Trinity River. And I consider the Eureka Chinatown Project my friends and my allies and distant family. And like families, we do disagree sometimes, but that's okay. We learn from it and we move forward.
Thank you. Let's see. What was your reaction to seeing the street in Eureka being renamed as Charlie Moon Way?
My first thought was, how long is it going to be before someone tags it? Honestly, I mean, we Charlie Moon, I know who he is. I know what it means, but in our county, we have some deep-seated racism and discrimination, systematic oppression. And there's some real things happening at people's dinner tables that people don't want to be open and talk about. And as much as we say, yeah, we're all going to get along, there's still that group of folks out there that don't believe there should be a sign that has a native name on it or an immigrant name or any kind of name. There's too many of these kind of restaurants and not enough of these restaurants. And when it gets down to the economics of it, my thought was, I wonder how long that'll stay. And surprisingly, it stayed up quite a bit. It's been a few years now. But it gave me, it did give me initial pause, but I was really proud of it because it's saying, you know, we were here. He was part of when the Chinese were experiencing the expulsion, he was one of them that they went after. And that he married Minnie Tom, who was the the Redwood Creek Native American person that he married. But more importantly, you know, when you think back to the gold rush, and then it's like a second genocide. You know, you go through the 1850 colonization, then in the late 1800s, 1880-ish, you know, that's another genocide. So now, not only do you look brown, native, now you look Chinese, now it's like, wow, okay. But then when you think about it, some of the history says that when groups of people are oppressed, they stick together, and they develop communities, and they develop new pathways, and they learn from each other. And one of the stories I'll tell you guys this story. I don't know that I've told it, but a story is that my great grandmother, Minnie Tom, she was in her house, and at the end of the workday, Grandpa Charlie would come home, and he'd make her dinner every night. He'd try to get home and make her dinner, and he'd leave the dinner by her door. He wouldn't take it in, and that's what happened. That was how they managed to communicate in a way. And sometimes when the food wasn't good, the food would fly out the door. So I think if you're married in the audience, you could understand when that might happen. But that's a story we kind of chuckle at because, you know, in our family, everybody kind of has different palates. And we're like, and I think a few plates have flown out the door from time to time. But it just shows you the resilience and the energy spent to express oneself with dissatisfaction, even if it is with food flying out the door. But that's a story we hold on to because it was the motion from her saying, you know, give me something better. I want, you know. But there's a lot of stories like that. And one of the things, you know, Daryl, there is somebody's going to have to research this, but Grandpa Charlie had a brother. And the story is Grandpa Charlie had a brother, and they were separated as children, and the one went to San Francisco. So there's a Grandpa Charlie brother, sibling out there. I haven't researched it. I don't know if the Historical Society has, but we've often wondered. They said that the story that I heard was that there were letters going back and forth, and that silk was sent from San Francisco north, and that our grandmother used to have silk and jars of different kind of herbs. He would send like tea to her, and they kept in contact. That's what I was allowed to know. Sometimes the stories we get don't get passed to us until somebody's ready to release them. So
I was reading about that in the historical records yesterday.
yeah.
About they both came to America together.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what kind of records are down in San Francisco. But I have an even funnier story. This one's a little lighthearted because that was a bit heavy stuff, guys. I went to the Chinese health plan in San Francisco because they have their own health plan there. And I applied for a job at the Chinese health plan because, you know, I'm Charlie Moon's great-great-granddaughter. You know, I go in, and the Chinese health plan is very Chinese. Like, it's very Chinese. It's very proud. It's very well run. And I told and it was like a really strange moment when I said, I am part Chinese. I would love to work for the Chinese health plan. And that lady laughed so hard. I mean, she laughed the whole time. I thought for sure I'd get that job, but I didn't. But in that moment, it was like, hey, I'm part Chinese. I need a job too. But it was an interesting because sometimes when people are native, they say, oh, I have a great grandmother that's a native. And so that was my moment.
Thank you, Yolanda. Let's give all of our panelists a big round of applause. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers, questions from the audience, answers from our panel. Would anybody like to ask a particular question? I'll try to get the mic to those that I can reach. When you want to ask a question, you can come up and use the mic.
Okay. This is about something that I saw in what you had on the screen, Katie. The various enterprises. It seemed to me that one of them said something about intelligence, and I was very curious about that.
Let me get to that really quick. So, whoops, not that one. Yeah, so I'll say a couple things about it, and I think Alex will probably have some more stuff to say about it too. But from what we can tell, the ad, which I'll find, it says Chinese Intelligence Office, and from what we can tell, what a Chinese Intelligence Office was it was a location where Chinese immigrants in the States could perhaps dictate letters or write letters and send them to China. So, send money to China, send maybe goods to China, send and receive. It was kind of like a international post office. But it also probably could have served as a spot for people to find jobs if they needed them, work with labor contractors. And if you want to say anything else, I'll look for it.
Yeah, there's a book that's out in our suggested reading case that we've got out there called something like The Middle Kingdom Under the Big Sky, The Chinese in Montana. And one thing that it talks about a lot is this system where a lot of Chinese stores would have ties with stores back in Hong Kong or in Guangzhou, and they would work as a sort of equivalent of Wells Fargo or that sort of thing, in that, yes, if Chinese immigrants wanted to send money back to their family, rather than just trusting it to the postal system and having all these individual envelopes full of money going, they would pay a certain storekeeper here in California, and he would have ties with the store in Hong Kong or wherever, and so he would be sending money orders, and so then the family back home could pick up the money from the local store that had this connection. And that letters were also sent through businesses like this, so that instead of a letter having to find an individual immigrant at their home, it would be sent to this particular store, and then that's where the individual people would go to get their mail. So it seems that this sort of thing is probably what Chinese Intelligence Office is referring to.
And the Chinese were not literate as we are today in America. They didn't. There wasn't a high literacy rate because the language is really difficult because you have to basically memorize it by sight if you want to learn to write it. There's no alphabet per se in Chinese at all.
I think if I remember right, the Trinity County Historical Society might have at least a scanned copy of one of the letters that was received in Trinity County, and I think it was a guy saying, like, brother, send me some money. I got into some bad situations here. I need some help,
Yeah, they do have that in the collection,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's a fascinating letter. They've gotten a couple of different translations of it, which have slightly different implications, but basically that this young man in Trinity County has gotten in trouble with a woman, and the woman is demanding money from him, and so he wants to get money from his older brother to be able to get out of this situation, and it was definitely sent to a particular store, and so yeah, it shows a specific example of this kind of process.
Thank you all. And next question, if you want to come up to the front here if possible, just so folks at home can hear us too. Get as close as I can. There you go.
Yeah, my question has to do with, so, there are families that were expelled or, still existed. How much have you looked into, say, folks who went to San Francisco or back to China, or traced those families to see what kind of information and stories they might have?
One thing that happens when you start looking closely at records of Chinese individuals is, there's such a language barrier where if a census worker did go around and try to get people's names, they might spell them wrong. They transliterate them in 10 different ways. So it makes it really hard to trace people from place to place like you typically would with census records for, John Smith. So that's one challenge. Yeah.
If you're asking about specific Chinese who were expelled from Eureka. What happened to them? There is scant records, if anything. They arrived in San Francisco on these two ships on a Sunday morning. The telegraphs were not working. Nobody knew they were coming, and they basically dispersed. Okay? If you're asking about other Chinese, I can tell you my grandfather came to the United States and he went back and he said, don't send your sons to America. Okay? But 3 of them came here, 4 of them came here, 3 of them died here. Okay? So, you know, there have been some newspaper research a couple of years after the expulsion. They thought they found somebody, a woman, who was one of the expelled, and the newspaper people knocked on her door. She answered a couple of questions, and then somebody said, probably in the background, don't talk to them anymore. Chinese don't trust the police, okay? That's basically what happened. They don't trust authorities.
And that is part of the research that I'm doing. Is it is sort of a dream, you know, an ultimate goal of maybe someday we'll be able to make contact with somebody who's a descendant of someone who was expelled from Humboldt County and maybe learn some of their family stories. But so far it is, you know, a dream that has not been fulfilled because there are so many challenges in tracing people in all these different records. As Katie mentioned, people's names are written so many different ways. A lot of Chinese people in the United States in that time period would have gone by 5 or 6 different names that they used in different circumstances, and of course the names that people doing the English language record keeping would know them by, things like Chinaman Charlie. This doesn't help you. You can't find somebody by that name and find out who he is and what his background is. There are a few glimpses in newspaper articles, as Daryl mentioned, where we can follow maybe 6 or 7 people who were expelled from Humboldt County. We can follow them up until about 1892 or 1893, and then they just sort of glimmer away, and we can't trace them so far after that. There's an article from San Jose newspaper in, I think, 1892 or 3, in which there was actually a claim made that it is known who fired the shot that killed Councilman Kendall, because these 2 men who were up on an assault to murder with the intent to murder charge in San Jose were supposedly involved in the shooting here. And this information was passed on to the newspaper by a merchant, a Chinese merchant in San Jose, who said that he had been in Eureka at the time of the expulsion and that he knew it was common talk within the community that it was these 2 guys who were involved in the shooting. Unfortunately, this man does not give his name in the newspaper because he says, I'm a member of the C-Up company, and so are these 2 men, and it's not going to look good if I go on record as saying that they did this, so I'm not going to give my name in the paper, but you all know me, you know that I'm a respected businessman and I can be trusted, which is great that the reporter knew him, but I don't know him, and so that means that I haven't been able to follow him any further and find out who this particular man was. So it's a detective process, and maybe someday the detectives will get lucky, but we're still searching.
For some of you that do genealogy, here, I'll give you an example. All right, my last name is spelled C-H-I-N-N, okay? In Chinese, it's a specific word. The word Chan, C-H-A-N, C-H-E-N, C-H-I-N, with the same it's pronounced chin, C-H-U-N. They're all the same Chinese word usually. There are other chins with a different Chinese word for the surname. Some people, when you see the word W-A-N-G, we pronounce it in the United States, they say Wang. And not in my dialect, it's Wong, okay? And it's not necessarily the same word in Chinese. I'm talking surnames. Surnames are really important in Chinese. So anyway, so that's just one of the challenges that you face in trying to trace down anybody, much less somebody from Eureka.
And I just want to mention that we just had someone graduate from high school named Charlie Moon. So I think that name's pretty popular. We've got like generations of Charlie Moons within the 9 children that he had. So I know that the name Charlie Moon comes up quite a bit. I think it's going to continue to keep coming up. So I just want to mention that because he's 18, so he's going to, if he has a son, there's going to be another Charlie Moon there.
Time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, I have a question. At any particular time during this period, what would you say was the most number of Chinese people you've had living in this area? And also, what part of China would you say they were mostly from? What dialect do they speak? Was it Mandarin, Cantonese? I don't know. I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Now, one other part to this is, can you also expand a little bit about the violence that was committed against the Chinese, and can you talk a little bit more about that, please? Thank you.
The dialect that I speak is probably close to what the Chinese at the time of the expulsion speak. They were mostly from what we call the Toisan area. Some people call it Thuyi in my dialect, which means 4 counties, roughly translated. I can still speak that dialect. In fact, Brianne Merja, who was instrumental in starting this Eureka Chinatown project, has an aunt and mother whom I can talk to. They live in Detroit and the Bronx. Okay, excuse me, I'm sorry, Newark, New Jersey. So when they come to visit or when I go visit them, we can talk. That's where most of the Chinese came from who immigrated up to about 1965. After that, the immigration laws changed, and that changed everything.
And do they speak mostly Cantonese or Mandarin?
No, neither. Okay? Some people say, oh, they speak Cantonese. No, it's not Cantonese. It's actually, Cantonese is called Guangdonghua, okay, which means Guangdong province, okay? But, and that's, you could say people from Canton speak that. That's Cantonese for Cantonese, but the people who speak Toisan or Thuyi come from an area southwest of Hong Kong in what's called the Pearl River Delta.
In terms of how many Chinese people were in Humboldt County in the 19th century, it's sort of the high point of a Chinese population here. We certainly don't know for certain because of these large numbers of workers who would come in for various projects and then presumably go to other counties. So numbers like those hundreds of people working on railroad construction that were mentioned in the newspaper articles, that we don't know. But in terms of traceable records, as of the 1880 census, there were, I think at that point, only about 240 Chinese people living in the entire county. It must have increased pretty strikingly by 1885 because the number who were actually expelled from Eureka, you get different accounts of it, but according to a newspaper article reporting on the arrival of the 2 ships in San Francisco, 310 Chinese people were on these 2 ships. And those are just the Chinese people from Eureka. There were Chinese people in a lot of other communities in Humboldt County, most of whom actually stayed in the county up until 1886, when at the 1-year anniversary of the expulsion from Eureka, there was a meeting held here in Eureka to celebrate that anniversary and talk about how are we going to carry on the legacy. And leaders of this meeting said, let's encourage all the other communities in Humboldt County to do the same as we did. And so they sent representatives to the different communities, and there were anti-Chinese meetings held in the different communities. And so throughout 1886, largely through economic boycotts. More and more of the Chinese residents of the county were convinced strongly to depart. And it seems that only in September of 1886, that was when the Chinese people of Ronerville left, and they seem to have possibly been the last ones who left during this period of expulsions. But so yes, if you have 310 people from Eureka expelled, there's probably at least another 200 or so living in different communities around the county, most of whom did not leave until sometime in 1886.
We don't have tales of the Chinese being criminal elements, except as, you know, just like any other people, so they're not mentioned as being criminals. I did run into an instance of a Chinese girl in the 50s, maybe 1850s, who was maybe 7 or 8, who was bullied by a boy, a non-Chinese boy, and she punched him. And the teacher, being a teacher, said she made the boy apologize for bullying her, and she was not thrown out of school or expelled or otherwise disciplined from this account that I read.
I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. I do encourage you to provide your additional questions to each of our panelists, and to please enjoy the exhibits. We also have food and drink available up front. We will open the doors to the public here at 6 p.m. Let's give each and every one of our panelists a big round of applause. Let's also give a big round of applause to the man behind the camera, Jay Tillman. And I also encourage you all to consider making donations to all of the entities that are involved with making this project possible. It goes a long way to helping us keep the lights on and achieve our respective missions. With that, thank you all very much for being here this evening. Please enjoy the exhibits and have a wonderful night. Thank you.